Today, I'd like to first ask a question on the poll here regarding the pandemic of 1918. The following is often stated regarding that pandemic flu. The virus does not discriminate. It hit the rich and poor alike. So please vote, true or false. We'll give a few seconds for you to vote. All right, so could you show the results? 62% said true and 38% said false. So almost even, but most people are saying that it hit the rich and poor alike. I think the issue is what do we mean by the word hit? Does the virus not discriminate? Well, I think we could all rest assured that the virus does not discriminate, and that. But the issue is people's circumstances when they are exposed to the virus. So these are some research from the 1918 pandemic. We see here that we see this slide here that this is the incidence. And we see this curve here is the poor and the very poor and the well-to-do and the moderate. And we see that the incidence is much higher in the poor and the very poor. If we see this slide here, this slide represents mortality. And we see the economic status of the household, well-to-do, moderate poor, and very poor. And we see that mortality of the very poor is much higher. So it's actually data that are very similar to the data being generated in the pandemic flu of 2020. So the issue is, what are the sources of the disparity for during pandemics? And I think we could boil it down to three different categories. One, there are differences in social positions based on income, wealth, education, occupation, race, and ethnicity. And we have disparities in exposure to the influenza virus. Essentially, the poor and people from the lower economic strata of society find it very difficult to social distance. There are disparities in the susceptibility to contracting the influenza. People from the lower economic groups have lower immune systems. And then there are disparities in treatment once disease has developed. Also, there are disparities in access to health services. So all of this adds up to unequal levels of illness and death. And essentially, we have differences in the social context and also in the policy context. And I want to introduce is we have a difference between equality and equity. What is the difference between equality and equity? In this slide, we see equality means equal treatment. People should have equal resources and equal opportunities. However, equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities to reach equal outcomes. Essentially, because of the different circumstances, even if people have equal resources, they may not have equal outcomes. So let me, for those people who like pictures, this slide shows the difference between equality and equity. And so what we have here, we have people with equal resources to have the same boxes in order to see this baseball game. However, not everybody have the same circumstances. And we see there's a difference in height. So in order to enhance equity, we give more resources to people who have different circumstances. And so now there are equal outcomes. Now, this slide, what's wrong with this slide in trying to demonstrate the difference between equality and equity? Well, the issue is that, well, one could say that this person here needs more resources, not because of social circumstances, but because of a difference in height. So this slide is not perfect to demonstrate the issue between equality and equity. So essentially, we're looking at concerns with social circumstances and policy, and not necessarily biology. So this slide, I like this slide better because here we see people with the same height and they have equal resources, okay? But this person here doesn't have the same outcome as the other people. And the reason for that is because of a concern with social circumstances. This lower level here represents inequities due to social circumstances. And because of the issue here with social circumstances, this person needs more resources in order to have an equal outcome. Social systems are not naturally inequitable, but are rooted in discriminatory practices and beliefs. Equity means an absence of avoidable differences among groups of people. And equity is a solution for addressing unjust, imbalanced social systems. Here's another slide showing socially disadvantaged neighborhoods. Here we have two neighborhoods with equal community resources. So we have equality, but we have inequities because this neighborhood does not have equal outcomes. So in order to have equal outcomes, we need more community resources for this neighborhood here. It may become evident during a pandemic that a particular demographic group or groups with compounded social vulnerabilities may prove to be exceptionally at high risk of death. So why address inequities? What is fairness? So essentially what we have, if we fail to take steps to mitigate health disparities, our society will look different at the end of the pandemic. Who will be missing because of disproportionate deaths due to disproportionate impact of the pandemics? And essentially what we have from Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. What are the threats from the pandemic that causes unequal outcomes? Well, we have the direct health impacts from the virus. We have disproportionate impact from public health measures and the health systems, and we have disproportionate economic impacts as well. This slide shows the change in employment due to the pandemic in this past year. We have the change in jobs or employment between the wealthiest and the bottom level of society. We see that the lower paid jobs in the service sector were permanently lost among the poorer people, and we see that the return to employment was much lower in the bottom 25% of our society. So essentially, the concern is the disproportionate impact of the virus. The COVID-19 disproportionately affect the poor, minorities, and a broad range of vulnerable populations. The collateral effect of the pandemic due to the global economic downturn and social isolation and movement restriction measures are unequally affecting those in the lower power strata of our societies. The goal is to decrease the disparities in the COVID-19 case fatality rates, which disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. Essentially, social distancing is a privilege. Not everyone could social distance. Think about multi-generations living in a small house. How could they social distance? And also there's inequities in testing due to lack of access. And so we have to consider the social environmental context and health systems. Example that's happening now with the vaccine distribution, a title from a recent editorial, Equity Left Behind. We have all these policies and how to distribute the vaccine. We have to understand why vulnerable groups are left behind. They don't have the means to access the vaccine in their society. With that, let me say thank you very much for your attention.